Some games are all about fun, escapism through gameplay and narrative. Some games are political and social pieces with powerful messages to deliver. Far Cry is a little bit of both. I'm Bob the Hollow, and this is Battle Royale and Far Cry, social issues hidden in plain sight. Battle Royale is a very influential Japanese movie with a devout cult following, even though the name itself is, today, far better known as the video game genre that it would come to inspire. The plot of the movie is pretty simple, even if very much absurd. In a not-so-distant future, society is plagued by teenager violence, and the way they find to deal with it is the Battle Royale, an event where randomly chosen high school students are thrown into an island, given guns, and told to kill each other until only one survives. And they have exploding colors to prevent them from fleeing the place. If the Hunger Games sound anything like it, it's because it is. Now, watch the movie only once and you will probably see an over-the-top ode to violence with an absurd premise and a cast of teen actors mold for the sheer spectacle of it. The age-old adage of violence begets violence is blatantly presented, but it quickly fades into the chaos that follows. But something will likely feel odd about this first impression that you've got, and if you watch it again, you may realize that, beneath all that, lies a study of friendship and humanity, showcasing how extreme hardship can test the limits of our bonds and values, and that despite everything, it is worth holding on to that which makes us human. It is, in some regards, an artistic representation of the director's first-hand experiences surviving the Great War and its aftermath, and also his way of passing on the insight that he has gained while living these experiences. That is a much clearer picture of what this movie represents, but it's still missing something very important. Something that eluded me for a very long time and that would probably continue to do so if it wasn't for this very unassuming scene that was added to the extended cut alongside 2 more flashbacks. This is the last scene of the director's cut, and that, right there, is the movie telling me what it's about. It's the director telling us the reason this story exists. This work of fiction is an attempt to convey a very important message. Violence begets violence, to those who may not be interested in hearing about it. The whole Battle Royale project was an attempt by the character Kitano to answer that very same question, as he is a teacher who actually cares. What the hell do I tell them? How do I make them understand? A theme that is reinforced throughout the movie by Kitano's inability to communicate with his own daughter. In order to convey its message, this movie didn't have to be over the top. It didn't have to feature high school teenagers. And it didn't have to be so absurd, but it was. It was because you can sit a teenager down and quote Martin Luther King all day long, but at the end of the day, they may not really care all that much about it. So, the movie states its premise and plants the seed, then moves on to be a grotesquely entertaining piece that is, after all is said and done, a teen movie. It never bangs on about its original premise, but it makes sure to still harken back to it. At the end, where the surviving characters who escape the island, two teenagers that stay out of the cycle of violence instigated by the events, end up accepting that they themselves might have to resort to violence, that it won't be an easy choice, but that it's the choice that they'll make if it comes to it. Teenager stabs Kitano, Kitano kills dozens of teenagers. Formerly non-violent teenager proceeds to carry the very same knife that stabbed Kitano in the first place, so that she may, one day, enact some violence of her own. The movie never spends too much time in this message because it could lose its intended audience, but the seed has been planted, and one can only hope that it will flourish. Hate begets hate, violence begets violence. Right, but what's all that got to do with Far Cry? The series has never been known for its prominent social and political messages. In fact, 3 and 4 have met their share of accusations of racism, of outdated turn-of-the-last-century stereotypes, and, as Polygon puts it, in Far Cry 5, any thematic point to be made about religion, the United States, or the current state of the nation's politics is quickly thrown aside. The whole series is mostly known for simply not giving a shit. No, these games aren't political. These games have always been about fun, right? Well, I would and will argue that Far Cry has used the exact same technique that Battle Royale used as a vehicle for its messages, and that its messages are extremely on point. Starting with Far Cry 3, lead writer Jeffrey Yohalan says it best in his Rock Paper Shotgun interview. It's a riddle for the player to solve. You can approach Far Cry 3 on the surface level and still have a lot of fun. My goal was to bring joy to everyone, but at the same time, I'm hoping players can look at the riddles in the story and see that there's a lot more going on there, and actually look into themselves and learn something through the journey. And I believe him because the series has been consistent in having political and social issues embroidered into their plots. One concept that has been consistent throughout the last 3 entries is the idea that criminals are often the byproduct of their environments. Vaas is the first in a long line of Far Cry villains to make this point, and, in Far Cry 3, this concept extends to the player character as well. Jason is, by all accounts, a psychopath. It's not just the killing hundreds of people that makes me say that. Killing itself doesn't make you a psycho. Maybe you are trained and/or conditioned to do it, maybe you do it purely for self-defense, maybe you were born in a country at war, but Jason is a white man from Hollywood that never held a gun in his life, and he's just taking it in strides. After the initial shock, it comes to a point where he actually seems to relish the massacre. And I say this with confidence that it was deliberate because, unlike most games where violence is the only way to make it out alive, the reasonable response to the situation, Far Cry 3 gave you a very interesting point of reference: Jason's friends. They don't actively participate in the story, they just stand there, fixing their boat, as if to say, this is what a normal person's reaction would look like. We are not soldiers, we don't want to kill or be killed. We don't belong here. But, in truth, it is Jason that doesn't belong with them. They talk and hug, and Jason finds it all abhorrently boring. There is action to be had, there is shooting to be done, and the incorporeal voice inside my head is giving me a new objective. There are some people that must be killed, and I'm the only one that can do it. Jason could stay here, in this peaceful cave, but the truth is he really can't. At the end of the game, you, as a player, are given 2 choices. The bad ending will have Jason himself killed at the climax of his delusions, showcasing how rampant his psychosis really was. And the other one, the really, really bad ending, will have Jason going back home with his friends. Jason truly is a psychopath, and, like any psychopath worth his salt, the people around him are clueless. They simply have no idea. In Far Cry 4, Pagan Min, my favorite Far Cry villain, continues the concept that was introduced with Vaas, as he is a criminal that was literally born into a world of crime, and was later twisted into the layered mass of insanity that we meet by events beyond his control. And this installment of the series is, at the same time, both more straightforward and more elusive than its predecessor when it comes to its hidden theme. I think this game means to stir our curiosity, tapping into the general population's collective perception of first world countries' interventionism in third world governments. Quite brilliantly, this idea is very, very blatantly presented in Willis Huntley's missions. The CIA's presence in Kyrat is very much real, and they backed the royalists' resistance that fought the nationalist revolution and eventually led to Pagan's rise to power. But once Huntley's missions are over, that idea is seemingly forgotten by the game, and you are left with the impression that this concept was, indeed, restricted to these missions. You keep playing and forget about it as well, without realizing that it represents a microcosm of everything that's happening around you. As far as Kyrat's history goes, the CIA tells you about its current involvement, but it was seemingly involved in all the conflicts that plagued this land. The first conflict came when the nationalists dethroned the monarchy, and if you read the journal entries of Mohan Gale, the protagonist's father, judging by how he describes their attack on the castle, it sounds like they had received training, and on a later entry, he states that they would be using American-made weapons, both of which would indicate the CIA's involvement. A resistance group, called the Royalists, would fight the nationalists with little success until Pagan arrived. Pagan came seemingly out of nowhere and brought with him a distant relative of the former royal family, a legitimate heir to the throne. And most people never questioned this, but how did he find this heir? It sounds a lot more feasible to me that the CIA would have provided Ming with the heir, considering the rich in assets, which is made even more believable after Willis mentions that he recruited AJ's father while he was working for Ming, which would mean that the CIA would have backed the Royalists in order to install its own puppet in the throne. And then Mohan himself was later given weapons by the CIA as he led the former Royalist resistance, now called the Golden Path, in his fight against Pagan Ming. As far as the player goes, you're basically doing the same thing they did all over again, coming into the country illegally, supporting the armed rebels and forcibly removing the current dictator in order to install a new dictator of your choice who, by the way, isn't necessarily any better than the previous one. But hey, it was all for a good cause, right? Now, just to be perfectly clear, I don't think the game intended to point the finger at any one government or agency in particular, as it never seems to pass any kind of judgment on them. They just point out that some first world countries like to intervene in other countries with things like drug wars, military interventions, coups and other means, while at the same time pointing out that maybe the situation of the countries being intervened upon isn't all that simple, and that maybe our collective perception of these situations may have been skewed by how some information is delivered to us and how some information is deliberately kept from us. One argument I've seen being used when comparing Pagan to Vaas is that we don't get to interact with Pagan all that much, and I think that is one of the factors that tie into that last point I made. He never lies to us, and he's constantly trying to reach out and have a dialogue, but even if you want to hear him out, the game simply won't let you. It's part of the game's narrative. Your perception of the world has been redacted.
Have we ever tried to meddle in other countries' elections?
Oh, probably, but it was for the good of the system.
We don't do that now, though? We don't mess around other people's elections, Joe?
Only for a very good cause in the interests of democracy.
Right.
Welcome to Hope County, Montana, Land of Controversy. This game has been attacked left and right, quite literally by both the left and right sides of the political spectrum. The right says that it's an attack on the far right. The left says it's too lenient on the far right. Neither side is satisfied with the game's message regarding the American political stage, and maybe that's because they are completely missing the point. This game is simply not about that. Pointing fingers is counterproductive, and the developers know it. They take occasional potshots, like in the Make Hope Great Again side mission, but other than that, it actually spends a lot more time celebrating the most earnest aspects of American culture. In this regard, it's not a satire, it's a parody. Now, I understand that given the setting of this game, some people were expecting a very strong and direct message aimed at certain politicians, namely Trump, and the creed of their followers, namely MAGA, but, like I said, finger-pointing is so damn counterproductive. You don't get people to listen to you by antagonizing them, and this game had important messages to deliver, messages that had to be heard, and some of these people claim the developers didn't have the courage to get political. Seriously? These games got very, very big balls, my friend. I have spoken out about Wolfenstein 2 before, and I find it very ironic that many of the people complaining about Far Cry 5's lack of political statements are the same ones who praised Wolfenstein. For instance, Polygon, whom I have already mentioned in this video as they would have berated Far Cry 5, had nothing but praises in their Wolfenstein review. I had a similar complaint about that game, and do you wanna know what the difference is? Wolfenstein was riding the hype wave of political awareness by delivering the safest, most tested, surest way to get an Oscar type of message of all times. Nazis are bad. Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. You don't have to tell people that Nazis are bad, except for Nazis themselves, but then again, they sure as hell aren't going to list you prattle on about how evil they are. Machine games, if you want to reap the glories of being political, then, by all means, get political. Now, back to Far Cry. They have had fundamentalist groups in the series before, but they've never been on the forefront. And now that they have chosen to talk about it, they didn't go with the easy scapegoat, which has historically been Middle Eastern terrorist groups. No, they've chosen America. And the poster boy for Eden's Gate is a white, male, Christian American at that. That could have backfired so badly. But they did it anyway, and that, my friends, is why these games got balls. Because it wasn't afraid to make itself a target, and because the message isn't as simple and sterile as fundamentalism is bad. The idea, I believe, is to challenge how we perceive what that concept entails and where it comes from. Eden's Gate isn't just about religion. It's about politics and other aspects of society as well, and that might get some people to realize that fanaticism doesn't have to be restricted to religious beliefs. And it's easy to see outsiders as enemies, to see flaws on others. It's a whole lot harder to look at ourselves and ask, hey, are we part of the problem? Am I? Far Cry doesn't take itself seriously, but it is very serious about its messages. Just like Battle Royale, it pretends to forget about these ideas, but they are always present, permeating the entire gaming experience, scattered throughout the limited narrative and chaotic gameplay. Other games may offer a more in-depth contemplative or philosophical perspective, but Far Cry is different because it has to be. Far Cry is different because it's talking to a different audience. Spec Ops: The Line, for instance, is considered by some as one of the greatest commentaries on war that our medium has to offer, but I doubt that its message will resonate with anyone who doesn't already agree with it. The narrative is too bleak, and the considerations too demanding. And I'm not criticizing. I absolutely love that game, but as far as reaching the people who would benefit from its message the most, this approach is heavy-handed, and it will antagonize more than educate. One approach isn't better than the other, each has its place. They are both important. Far Cry and Battle Royale are over the top and absurd because they have to be. They scream about everything else and whisper about their messages. Sometimes, speaking softly is the only way to be heard at all. And that brings us full circle to the not so hidden message of this latest game. Violence begets violence. Of course, the cycle of violence has always been present, but this time, for the first time, it really is on the forefront. The liberation mechanic, for instance, is very straightforward. The harder you push, the harder the lieutenants will push back. And this game also allows the player to change its perspective regarding the violence depicted in the game, mainly by changing the setting of the story. Past iterations took place in strange lands filled with stranger people. That let players more easily dehumanize both the enemy and themselves. It was easier to see the enemy as a faceless horde, and to see your actions as inconsequential. But now, we're all Americans now. And there are hundreds of Americans killing each other on American soil. What the hell happened here? This cult thing can't be real, can it? Wasn't there something like this in the 90s? Maybe I should Google it. But how would they even get so many guns? Well, there's always Walmart. And we're no longer escaping to a fictional fantasy land where our violent actions will go largely unnoticed by the rest of the world. We're no longer reshooting the beach or toppling a third world dictator. We're an American cop now. A cop mulling through hundreds of civilians. And shooting them in the back? Hey, shouldn't that cop be trying to arrest at least some of these people? Wait, aren't I the cop? Is this the appropriate response? Do I think this is normal? And all these questions and more that people might ask themselves while playing, is the greatest thing this game could hope for. It doesn't provide many straightforward answers, but it does provide the opportunity for people to ask their own questions, find their own answers, and to maybe consider a different perspective the next time they are faced with these topics in real life. And just like Battle Royale, the game proposes its premise at the beginning, pretends to forget about it in the middle, then comes back to it at the end to drive the point home. While Pagan Min's secret ending at the beginning of the game was about trust, this time the not-so-secret ending is about inflicting something that is being perceived as violence, and that will most obviously have very, very violent results. And we were all already expecting this choice. It wasn't a riddle, it was a direct question to the player. What path will you take? Will you choose the path of violence? But of course, we would all choose that. We're here to play the game after all. So the game doesn't punish you for it. It tries to give you a fun experience instead. And then, in the end, it comes back to this very same point in time and asks you this very same question again. Okay, you've played the game. You've had your fun. Now, what will you choose? Will you choose violence again? You know exactly what will happen next. We've shown it to you. Is this really what you want? Okay. This is the world you have created. It's all yours. Have fun with it. Alright, this is my perspective about the Far Cry series and what it represents in our culture, our society, and our gaming landscape, about how it might help some people further their understanding of these very, very important topics. Like I said, this is just my personal perspective of it, and I'm interested in hearing about what you all think about it. So, leave a comment down below, and thank you very much for watching. As always, thank you very much for my patrons, John and Vinny in particular. If you want to join them in helping support this channel, the link is in the description. Until next time, see ya.